Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. I was never the kind of person who believed in the paranormal. I was always skeptical about ghost stories, apparitions, and unexplained events. To me, the world was a logical place, governed by physical laws and concrete evidence. But that night, everything changed. For the first time, I felt a flicker of doubt in my rational mind and realized that maybe there are things we just can't understand. It was a winter night in Greenwood, and I was nearing the end of my shift when I received a rather unusual call. Dispatch gave me the address of an elderly woman who lived in an old, peaceful neighborhood of the city. She reported seeing a young girl running around in her backyard at night, and was afraid the girl might be planning something worse, maybe vandalism, or even a break-in. Naturally, I was skeptical, as always. I figured the elderly woman might simply be seeing things, perhaps a hallucination brought on by her advanced age. Or maybe it was just a prank by teenagers trying to scare her. In any case, it was my duty to check things out, so I got into the patrol car and started driving toward the address. On the way, the weather took a turn for the worse. The sky, which had been merely overcast, suddenly turned into a dark, menacing mass. Within minutes, a storm rolled in, bringing torrential rain, lightning, and thunder that shook the ground. The rain pounded against the windshield, and every flash of lightning lit the sky in an eerie way. The thunder rumbled through the air, making it seem as if the very heavens were collapsing around us. I arrived at the woman's house around 11 p.m. It was an old building, the exterior worn down by time, but still solid. The front yard was overgrown, with tall grass and some wilted plants. The lights were on inside the house, and I could see the elderly woman's silhouette through the living room window, anxiously waiting for me. I parked in front of the house and ran to the door, trying to shield myself from the downpour. The woman, who must have been about 80, opened the door with trembling hands. Fear was evident in her eyes. She was wearing a shabby robe and was wrapped in a woolen shawl, as if trying to protect herself, not just from the cold, but from something else. Something invisible. "Thank you for coming, officer," she said, her voice weak and quivering. "She's out there again, running through the yard. I'm so scared." I tried to reassure her, telling her I was there to help and would check the backyard to make sure everything was okay. Still visibly shaken, she pointed to the back door that led outside. "It's that way," she murmured. I walked through the house toward the back door, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease building inside me. When I reached the door, I attempted to turn on my flashlight, but the battery seemed weak. Even so, I opened the door and stepped outside, feeling the cold rain hit my face. "Is someone out here?" "Come on out," I called, my voice almost drowned out by the storm. I waited a few seconds, but there was no answer. Just the sound of the rain and the thunder echoing through the trees around the house. I looked around, trying to see through the darkness and the sheets of water, but there was nothing unusual. No movement. All I could see were the reflections of the house lights dancing on the puddles forming on the ground. Deciding to head back inside, thinking maybe the woman had been mistaken, I shut the door behind me. That was when I realized something was wrong. The elderly woman, who had been anxiously waiting for me, was now huddled in a corner of the living room, visibly shaking, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "She's inside the house," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with terror. My heart pounded. I spun around toward the hallway leading to the back of the house, and before I could process what was happening, I heard a thud from that direction. Pointing my weak flashlight down the corridor, I saw something that made me freeze. A young girl, around 13 years old, was running back and forth, moving too fast to be just a prank. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her clothes looked outdated, something a modern teenager wouldn't wear. I chased after her, shouting for her to stop, but she kept running as if she couldn't hear me. Then, without warning, she simply disappeared right in front of me. I stood there stunned, my rational mind scrambling for an explanation that wouldn't come. I kept thinking maybe it was a trick of the light, or my eyes playing games on me, fueled by tension and the dim flashlight. Before I could regain my composure, I heard the woman scream again. "There! She's out there now!" she cried. I turned toward the window overlooking the yard, and there she was, the girl, running through the backyard once again, her figure lit only by the occasional flashes of lightning cutting across the sky. But how was that possible? How could she have passed by me and gone out the back door? I raced to the door, determined to find a logical explanation. When I opened it and stepped back into the downpour, the girl had already vanished. The yard was empty, except for the sound of the rain and the rustling of trees. I searched every corner but found nothing. No footprints in the wet soil, no trace that anyone had been there. Returning inside, I was frustrated and confused, unable to make sense of what had just happened. The old woman was still trembling in the corner of the living room, her eyes wide with fear. I knew there was nothing I could say to fully calm her, so I tried giving her at least a partially comforting explanation. I think she took off," I lied, forcing my voice to sound confident. "She must be a neighborhood girl playing a trick, and with all this rain, it was too hard to catch her. I'll make sure the neighbors keep an eye out, but I don't think this will happen again." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. To be honest, neither was I. The feeling that something was deeply wrong in that house wouldn't leave me. I suggested she try to get some rest, then said goodbye, wishing the night would end quickly. A few months went by. I carried on with my work, trying to put that night behind me. Life went on, but the memory of that young girl running through the yard and disappearing before my eyes never left my mind. I avoided talking about it with my colleagues, certain I'd be ridiculed. It was tough to admit that something like that had shaken me, especially as a police officer. Then, on an ordinary morning at the precinct while I was reviewing reports, I got some news that took me by surprise. The elderly woman, owner of the house where I'd responded to the call, had passed away. Heart attack, they said. She was found in the living room, the same place she had been trembling with fear that night. The news hit me hard, because although I'd never believed in the supernatural, the connection between what had happened that night and her death was impossible to ignore. Shortly afterward, I found out the house had been sold. A young family moved in, a couple with 2 small children. The place that once felt so eerie and mysterious was suddenly full of life again. They planted flowers in the yard, repainted the exterior, and the lights shining from the windows gave the home a new energy. I felt relieved, thinking maybe this new life would chase away whatever shadows lingered there. But my relief was short-lived. Not long after, dispatch received another call from that same address. The new tenants reported seeing a young girl running around the yard. The description was identical. A girl of about 13, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, disappearing as quickly as she appeared. And there was more. The couple also mentioned that the girl wasn't just staying in the yard. On several nights they saw her inside the house, appearing in their children's rooms or in the hallway. When the station notified me about the call, a chill ran down my spine. The memory of that night came rushing back, and I knew I couldn't face it again. So I made a decision I never thought I'd make. I let another officer handle it. It wasn't easy, but I knew I couldn't return to that place after what I'd seen and felt. Maybe it was cowardice, but it was something I could live with. I went on with my duties, trying to push it all out of my mind, but deep down, I knew I'd never truly erase those memories. And so, The mystery of that house remains. For me, it was the first and only time I ever questioned the reality I thought I knew. Since then, I do my best not to dwell on what may or may not exist beyond what we can see. My partner Richard and I were called to respond to an alarm that had gone off in an old office building located in downtown Chicago. The structure, with its facade worn down by time and pollution, had been converted into medical offices a few years earlier. During the day, it combined the charm of the past with modern functionality, but at night, its dark windows and cold walls created an unsettling atmosphere. We arrived around 2 a.m., a time when the city was silent, except for the occasional sound of distant cars and the rustling of tree leaves. The building was completely locked up, with no obvious signs of activity, save for the lights from a 24-hour pharmacy next door. Its pale glow fell across the sidewalks and the parking lot, giving everything a slightly eerie quality. I already felt that something was off the moment we parked our patrol car. We were greeted by an elderly doorman who looked tired and worried. He seemed confused that the alarm had gone off at all, given the hour and the location. "Good evening, officers. I really don't understand what might have happened. None of the tenants are here at this time. It's very strange," he said, shaking his head as he led us to the main entrance. The motion sensor that triggered the alarm was located on the second floor, in one of the medical offices. When we reached the door leading to the stairwell, we discovered it was locked. The doorman, visibly flustered, informed us that he did not have the key for that door. It was clear something was amiss. He told us that a locksmith had already been called and was on the way. While we waited, the silence of the building was almost deafening, interrupted only by occasional creaks from the old structure reacting to the cool, early morning air. A few minutes later, a man arrived, claiming to be the locksmith. He wore a simple uniform with the security company's name embroidered on the chest. His hair was graying, his expression serious, and he looked to be in his early 50s. Each of his movements was meticulous and precise, as though he had done this countless times before. "Good evening, officers," he said in a deep, steady voice. "Sorry for the delay. I'll get this door open for you." As he unlocked the door, I noticed he maintained a calm demeanor, but there was something unsettling about the way he carried himself, like he knew something we didn't. Once the door finally opened, we were met by a dimly lit corridor with walls that had seen better days. A faint smell of mildew lingered in the air, and it felt heavy, as though the building were guarding a long-forgotten secret. The locksmith led us toward the elevator. The stairs are quite old, poorly lit, and winding. "The elevator is a better option," he explained. Although Richard and I were wary, we agreed, believing it safer than climbing the old stairs in a building like this. When the elevator doors opened onto the second floor, we were greeted by darkness that seemed to swallow everything around it. Only a single light bulb at the far end of the hallway provided a weak glow, flickering as if it might go out at any moment. The scene was grim, and the silence was almost tangible, creating an atmosphere of growing tension. Richard stood on my right, gripping his flashlight tightly and pointing it ahead as we began to walk. The hallway seemed endless, each step echoing against the narrow walls, as though someone, or something, was watching us. My mind conjured up all sorts of scenarios, but I had to keep my cool and focus on the task. As we advanced, we checked each door lining the corridor. These were simple offices, some with plaques indicating specialties like dermatology, cardiology, and psychology. So far, every door was locked, and there was no sign of a break-in. Still, the tension mounted with each room we cleared. The farther we went without finding anything, the more unsettling it felt. We finally reached the last office, whose door was unlocked. Richard looked at me, and I nodded, signaling we should go in. We carefully pushed the door open, revealing an empty space divided into several small examination rooms and a reception area. It was clean and organized, but carried a distinct feeling of abandonment, as if no one had set foot there for a long time. We searched the place thoroughly and found nothing out of the ordinary. Everything seemed to be in order, yet a nagging sense that something was wrong continued to gnaw at me. Deciding it was time to leave and report the building as secure, we stepped back out of the office. That was when the atmosphere changed in an instant. The corridor, which had been swallowed by darkness, was now brightly lit by the elevator's glow. The contrast was so stark it took a few seconds for my eyes to adjust. I glanced at Richard. He was white as a sheet. "What is it?" I asked, a shiver running up my spine. "Those doors we just checked. They weren't all locked," he said, voice trembling. I turned to look down the hallway and my heart nearly stopped. Every single door that had been locked just moments ago was now wide open. The feeling of being watched returned with full force, and it felt as if some unseen pressure was pushing us out of that place. "Let's go back and check," I suggested, though my voice betrayed the lack of confidence I was trying to project. Something deep inside told me not to do it, but our responsibility to confirm the area was safe overrode my instincts. With nerves on edge, we started investigating the rooms all over again. Each open door led to the same vacant offices we had just inspected, but the sensation of eyes on us only grew stronger. Something was definitely wrong. Richard and I exchanged looks, both realizing this building harbored something deeply disturbing. When we finally decided to leave for good, we headed toward the elevator. That's when a loud crash reverberated down the hallway. A door slammed shut with tremendous force, followed by an oppressive silence. Our radios erupted with static, making it nearly impossible to communicate. Panic gripped me. It felt as though the building itself was warning us that our time there had run out. Without hesitating any further, we rushed into the elevator and pressed the button to go down. The doors closed excruciatingly slowly, as if some invisible force were trying to keep us from leaving. When we finally reached the ground floor, we hurried to the exit. I looked around for the locksmith to thank him and let him know what had happened, but he was simply gone. The doorman, who had been absent, now reappeared from somewhere and looked at us in confusion. "Did you see the locksmith?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. The doorman furrowed his brow. "Locksmith? He hasn't arrived yet. I just spoke with the service center, and they said he's on his way. He should be here in about 5 minutes. A wave of panic washed over me. "But he was already here," I insisted, describing the man who had let us in. "He unlocked the door for us." The doorman stared at me, dumbfounded, and asked me to call the service center again. I did so, and the response left me deeply shaken. The service center confirmed the locksmith was still en route. It was impossible that someone else had shown up earlier. When the real locksmith finally arrived, this time a woman, I didn't know what to believe. I described the man who had helped us and how he'd vanished without a trace. "What did he look like?" she asked, unlocking the main door. I described him: graying hair, middle-aged, serious face, and a demeanor that had seemed ordinary at first, but now felt full of secrets. She paused, her expression darkening. "You just described the doctor who used to rent the office on the 2nd floor. He took his own life at his home a few days ago." A chill ran down my spine, and for a moment, the ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. All I wanted was to run out of there. My partner Richard was in a similar state, rendered speechless, which was unusual for him. After that day, nothing felt the same. The building, with its dark corridors and hidden stories, became a place I avoided at all costs. No matter what happened, I knew I would never go back there again, for any reason. In the days that followed, the incident haunted my thoughts. During my shifts, I spoke with other officers, and was surprised to learn we weren't the only ones who had experienced strange occurrences in that building. There were stories of eerie presences, disembodied voices, and shadows moving in deserted hallways. The tale of the doctor who had taken his own life spread quickly among our colleagues, and soon everyone knew that the building housed more than just medical offices. There was something supernatural within its walls, something trapped there. Over time, I came to realize that the doctor's spirit didn't seem malevolent. On the contrary, it was as though he was attempting to protect us, possibly as a final act of redemption for something from his past. Other officers reported feeling a presence warning them of imminent danger, even saving their lives. Still, the thought of returning to that building filled me with unease. The sense that something was there, watching and waiting in the shadows, was something I simply couldn't face again. I knew if I were ever called there again, I wouldn't have the courage to go inside. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but the memory never left me. Even now, if a call comes in for that building, I ask another officer to take my place. And whenever I tell this story to someone, I always end it with the same warning. If one day you're called to that building, stay alert. You might not be alone. It was a stifling night in a quiet neighborhood of Cedarville. The air felt heavier than usual, and a sense of restlessness followed me throughout my shift. I was in my final hour of patrol, already thinking about heading home, when I spotted a car speeding well above the posted limit. I turned on my siren, and after a few moments, the driver finally pulled over to the side of the road. The avenue was deserted, lit only by the headlights of passing vehicles and the distant glow from a gas station. The sky was covered by thick clouds, hiding the moon and creating an even more oppressive atmosphere. As I stepped out of my patrol car, I felt a strange apprehension, as though something wasn't right. The man at the wheel seemed nervous, but that was common in situations like this. However, there was something different this time, a tension in the air that didn't feel normal. I paused, unsure how to proceed, but the feeling of imminent danger made me hesitate. Deciding to be cautious, I returned to my cruiser, where my faithful partner Thor, a robust Belgian shepherd, was waiting. Just as I turned to go back, a sudden cold breeze blew past, completely out of place on such a muggy night, sending chills down my spine. That was when I heard the passenger door slam shut with force. Confused, I looked inside the patrol car, certain I had locked all the doors before stepping out. To my surprise, there was a woman sitting in the passenger seat. She wore a police uniform very similar to mine, but it looked slightly outdated, as though from another time. She was young, likely around my age, and had a calm expression, but something in her eyes conveyed a profound sadness. The strangest part was that I hadn't called for backup on the radio, and I hadn't seen any other police vehicles nearby. Thor, normally calm and well-trained, began growling and barking furiously at the woman, something he never did unless he sensed a real threat. "Hello," I said, trying to mask the fear in my voice. "Can I help you?" She looked at me with unsettling composure. "He has a gun under the driver's seat," she said, her voice firm and controlled. A chill ran down my spine. Instinctively, I turned to confirm that the car I had pulled over was still there. When I looked back inside my cruiser, the woman had vanished. There had been no sound of the door opening or closing, no sign she'd ever been there at all, except for Thor's alarmed behavior. He was still growling at the now empty seat. My heart was pounding, but I knew I had to act quickly. I went back to the suspect's vehicle, hand hovering over my weapon, and ordered him to step out. I told him to move away from the car and lie down on the ground. Then I quickly searched the vehicle. Sliding my hand under the driver's seat, I felt the cold metal of a gun, exactly where the officer in my patrol car had indicated. My mind raced. Who was that woman? How did she know there was a weapon? Without hesitation, I handcuffed the man. He protested, insisting he had no idea about any gun, but I wasn't willing to take chances. After a brief struggle, I secured him and took him to the station. Once there, the revelation was even more shocking. Upon checking his identity, we discovered he was a fugitive wanted for a cold case. The murder of a young police officer that had occurred 20 years earlier. He had disappeared after the crime, and the police had never managed to find him. The weapon he was carrying in his car was the same one used in the murder. The case had been widely reported at the time, but, like so many unresolved cases, it had eventually been forgotten. As the prisoner was led to his cell, the atmosphere in the station grew heavy. My colleagues, aware of the unusual nature of the arrest, spoke about it with a mix of surprise and respect. Word spread quickly, and everyone was taken aback by the bizarre circumstances. So much so that even the most skeptical among us had difficulty ignoring what had happened. Later that night, still trying to process everything, I headed to the station's parking lot. Thor was with me. He seemed calmer, but there was still something different about his behavior, as though he too had been affected by what we'd seen. I tried to distract myself, playing a little fetch with him to shake off the disturbing memories of the night. And then I saw her again. The same officer was standing just a few yards away, but this time her expression was peaceful. She looked more real, more present, although I still knew I was facing something beyond rational explanation. Her uniform seemed sharper, every detail clearer, as if she were fully materializing right in front of me. "Thank you," she said, with a gentle smile that made her face glow in a nearly ethereal way. I stood there, unsure how to react. "No," I replied, feeling a surge of emotion take over me. "I should be the one thanking you. You saved my life." She nodded, her smile widening just a bit. "I was only doing my job. He would have killed you with the same gun he used to kill me. You've given me peace and happiness." With those words, she began to disappear, though not abruptly this time. Her image gradually faded until nothing remained but the hush of the night. I was left standing there with Thor, absorbing what had just happened. The air felt lighter, and for the first time that night, I sensed that everything was at peace. In the days that followed, I couldn't get the incident out of my mind. The image of that woman, her voice, and the unexplainable circumstances of her appearance haunted my thoughts. Wanting answers, I decided to look deeper into the murdered officer. I discovered her name was Mariana Carter, a young woman who had joined the police at 22. She was known for her bravery and dedication, always volunteering for the most dangerous assignments and earning everyone's respect. Her murder had profoundly shaken the police community back then. She had been investigating a series of robberies on the outskirts of town when she was brutally attacked and killed. Her body was found in an alley, and the murder weapon, taken by the killer, was never recovered, which caused great frustration among the investigators. Over time, the case went cold, especially after all leads dried up and the perpetrator remained at large. I spent several sleepless nights trying to make sense of everything. Why had Mariana appeared to me? Why at that exact moment, 20 years later, when her killer turned up with the same gun? And how had she known he was right there? These questions tormented me, yet I also felt a strange sense of peace, as though I had played a role in a mission I never knew existed. I started to notice that whenever I was in a dangerous situation, I felt a familiar presence, like someone was watching over me, protecting me. Thor seemed to sense it too. In tense moments, he would be unusually alert, as if waiting for a signal. There were times during my late-night patrols when I'd feel a cold breeze, even on warm evenings, almost as though Mariana was there. Some fellow officers noticed I had grown more introspective and asked me what had changed. I simply smiled and said it was the weight of responsibility. But deep down, I knew there was more. I knew Mariana was out there, still protecting other cops like me, maybe seeking redemption from the cruel fate that had taken her so young. One evening, during a solo patrol, I stopped in front of a memorial honoring fallen officers. Mariana's photo was there, alongside a brief description of her story and how her life had ended. I stood in silence for several minutes, and a gentle breeze passed over me, bringing an unexpected sense of comfort. I understood then that, wherever she was, she had finally found peace. That night, I returned home feeling as though I had been part of something greater than myself, something that transcended our usual understanding. Life went on, yet Mariana's memory never left me. I realized that whenever I doubted or faced danger, she would be there, guiding and protecting me, ensuring I fulfilled my duty, just as she had tried to fulfill hers. Over time, my bond with Thor grew even stronger. He seemed to have developed a sixth sense, like he could detect Mariana's presence before I did. Sometimes he would stare at an empty spot, as if seeing something beyond my sight. I knew, in my heart, that he sensed her, and it brought us closer. Years went by, and I continued working in law enforcement. I shared Mariana's story with a few close colleagues. Though some were skeptical, they all listened with respect. They knew something extraordinary had occurred, even if they couldn't explain it. For me, her presence became a source of strength and inspiration, a constant reminder that, even in our darkest moments, there is something greater watching over us, linking the world of the living to the world of the dead. Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. It was a hot summer afternoon in Miami when I received the call to investigate the disappearance of a young woman in a residential neighborhood. The sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but the heat still lingered in the air, making everything feel muggy and oppressive. Upon arriving at the address, I found an old house that looked like it had been built in the early 1900s. Its facade was somewhat worn by time but still imposing. The front yard was well maintained, with colorful flowers and neatly trimmed grass. Yet there was something in the air that unsettled me. Maybe it was the shadow of the large trees surrounding the house, or perhaps it was the sense that the place had witnessed countless years of stories and secrets that only the ancient walls could reveal. I couldn't ignore the feeling, but as an officer, I had to stay focused on my job. I was greeted at the door by a middle-aged man with a tired expression and dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. He introduced himself as Robert, the father of the missing girl. His hair was starting to gray at the temples, and there was a certain hopelessness about him, as though he was clinging to any shred of hope he could find. "Thank you for coming, officer," he said in a hoarse voice. "My youngest daughter, Anna, didn't come home last night. I've already called all her friends, and I went to all the places she usually visits, but no one has seen her since yesterday afternoon. I'm getting desperate." I motioned for him to calm down and asked him to take me inside so I could gather the necessary information to start a missing person report. As soon as I stepped into the house, I was immediately enveloped by a heavy feeling, as if the atmosphere inside was different from the outside world. Although well taken care of, the house seemed to bear a dense, almost tangible energy. We sat down at the living room table, and I began asking the usual questions. Robert answered them all patiently, though his gaze occasionally drifted off, as if he were somewhere else, perhaps replaying the final hours before he last saw his daughter. He told me Anna was 17 years old, a responsible and caring young woman, with no history of running away or having problems with the family. That afternoon, she had left to meet some friends and never returned. As I jotted down his answers, I noticed how strangely silent the house was. The only sound was the steady ticking of an old wall clock, marking time with unforgiving precision. With each passing second, the tension in the room seemed to grow. Suddenly, a door at the far end of the house opened, and a young woman came out. She was about 20, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing an old t-shirt and faded jeans. Her eyes were large and dark, seeming to absorb all the light around her, and her expression was pure shock. "Grandma!" she shouted, her voice full of astonishment and emotion, pointing toward the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Robert immediately stood up, his face pale and his eyes wide. He ran toward the hallway, calling out, "Mom! Mom!" The desperation in his voice hinted that he was searching for someone he never expected to see again. I got up, almost automatically, more out of reflex than understanding. I followed Robert down the hallway, my mind trying to process what was happening. All I could think in that moment was that something very strange was unfolding before me. Robert stopped abruptly in the middle of the hallway and turned to me, looking anxious. "Did you see her? Did you see my mother?" He was visibly shaken, causing my heart to pound faster. I glanced around, trying to figure out the situation. The hallway was empty, just a row of closed doors, nothing out of the ordinary. "No, I didn't see anyone," I replied, still confused by what had just happened. "Why are you so surprised to see her walking around the house?" Robert seemed to struggle to find the right words. Finally, he whispered, almost under his breath, She died last year." His voice faltered, as if he was trying to absorb the reality of what he had just said. The revelation hit me like a bucket of cold water. I stood frozen, trying to grasp the meaning of it all. "You mean you've been seeing her walking around the house?" I asked. Robert nodded slowly. "Yes. Ever since she died, we've all seen her. My oldest daughter, Bianca, sees her more often. It's like she's still here, taking care of us." The explanation was completely surreal, yet the fear and sincerity in Robert's eyes were undeniable. There was something deeply unsettling about the idea that his mother's presence, perhaps her very soul, was still dwelling in that house. I looked down the hallway again, as if expecting to see something that would confirm Robert's story. But all remained silent. The atmosphere, however, felt even heavier, as though charged with a tangible, invisible energy. "Officer, please," Robert said, interrupting my thoughts. "I know it sounds crazy, but do you think this could have anything to do with Anna's disappearance?" I didn't know how to respond. As a police officer, my job was to deal with facts and solid evidence, not the supernatural. But the intensity of the situation made me reconsider. Perhaps there was more to this house than logic alone could explain. "I'm not sure, sir," I answered honestly, "but we'll do everything we can to find your daughter. And as for what's happening here, maybe there are other ways to understand it." Robert nodded, still shaken, and walked back into the living room. The atmosphere had shifted, and now the house felt even more silent, as if even the furniture had gone quiet out of respect for what had just transpired. I continued filling out the report, but my thoughts were elsewhere, fixed on what I had just witnessed. The uneasiness I felt was so overwhelming that, for a moment, I considered finishing the report outside, where the air seemed less dense and suffocating. Before I could make that decision, Robert's oldest daughter, Bianca, came back into the living room, still looking shocked. She sat next to her father and began to share more about her grandmother's appearances. She described waking in the middle of the night with the sensation that someone was beside her bed. Upon opening her eyes, she would see her grandmother's silhouette in the darkness, silently watching her. Bianca said that despite the initial scare, her grandmother's presence always felt caring, like she was there to protect them. "You know, officer," Bianca said, her voice trembling, "it's strange, but it feels like she's trying to tell us something, like she's still worried about us. Ever since she died, the house has never felt the same. It's as if she left a part of herself here. Sometimes it's comforting, but other times, it's scary." I tried to comfort them by saying we would do everything we could to find Anna, and that maybe these sightings were nothing more than manifestations of the grief they still felt for their mother and grandmother. Yet I was wrestling with my own skepticism. What they described seemed very real. Too real to be dismissed as mere illusions of the mind. I finished the report as quickly as possible and stood up. "I'll need a recent photo of Anna for the investigation," I said, keeping a professional tone. Robert immediately went to a room and returned with a picture of his daughter, taken not long ago at a family gathering. I studied the photo. She looked like a bright, smiling young woman, full of life. It was hard to picture her vanishing without a trace, and harder still to imagine that her disappearance might be tied in any way to the strange events unfolding in that house. When I stepped out onto the front porch to review my report one last time, I felt immediate relief as the fresh air hit me. The tension I'd felt inside started to ease, but the worry over Anna and the mystery of her grandmother's appearances still weighed on my mind. While waiting for the patrol car to pick up the report and take it back to the station, I began to reflect on what I had witnessed. Was it possible Anna's grandmother was somehow trying to send a message? Could her spirit be restless, attempting to protect the family from something they couldn't see? Glancing back at the house, I saw Robert in the window, watching me with a mixture of concern and gratitude. Clearly, he trusted me to bring his daughter home, and that responsibility weighed heavily on me. Despite my doubts, something about him made me want to believe his story, to find a link between what they were experiencing and Anna's disappearance. When the patrol car arrived, I turned in the report with the recommendation that the case be treated as urgent. Yet as I walked back to my own car, I couldn't help looking over my shoulder one more time at that house, which now seemed so full of secrets. In the days that followed, the search for Anna continued without success. Each new lead went nowhere, and the mystery only deepened. Robert and Bianca kept reporting sightings of the grandmother, more frequently than before, as if something was about to happen. Then, a week later, something inexplicable occurred. I got a call from Robert, and his voice sounded different, calmer, as though something had changed. "Officer," he said, I don't know how to explain this, but Anna is back. She just showed up at home this morning, as if nothing had happened." "What do you mean she just came back?" I asked, baffled. "She doesn't remember anything. She says she was just walking down the street, and suddenly she was standing in front of our house. She's confused, but she's safe. And you know what's even stranger? Ever since she got back, we haven't seen my mother anymore. It's like she was waiting for Anna to return, so she could rest in peace." I was stunned. How could a young woman disappear for a week and reappear with no memory of what happened? And how could we explain the grandmother's sudden absence? I went back to Robert's house to talk to Anna and check her condition. She seemed fine, just disoriented. When I asked where she had been, she shook her head, perplexed. "I don't know. I just don't remember anything. It's like I've been asleep this whole time." As I left, I said my goodbyes to Robert and Bianca, who seemed relieved, but still shaken by everything they'd gone through. I knew I would never have all the answers to what had happened that week, but one thing was certain. Something beyond human understanding had taken place there. Over the years, I continued to think about that case. The sightings, Anna's disappearance. Some things just can't be explained, and perhaps that's the true nature of the unknown. The mystery of life after death, the link between our world and whatever comes next, is something we'll keep trying to unravel, but never fully comprehend. And as for Robert's house, whenever I drive through that neighborhood, I avoid looking in its direction. Not out of fear, but out of respect for what occurred there. It's a reminder that there is more between heaven and earth than we can see, and sometimes the souls of those we love may linger close by, watching over us in ways we don't fully understand. This experience taught me that, even as an officer, there are things we can't always explain. Sometimes, all we can do is accept the mystery and do our best to help those who are still here, hoping the ones who've passed on find their peace in the beyond. It was my second year as an officer in the Florida State Police. I had already faced some tough situations and witnessed things that made me question the world around me, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. That particular night, I was on duty with my partner, doing our usual patrols, when the radio crackled and the dispatcher's urgent voice warned us about a critical situation. A man was reportedly holding a gun to a woman. Without hesitation, we turned on the sirens and headed straight to the location provided. The streets were quiet and the city seemed asleep. As adrenaline coursed through my veins, I could feel the tension in the air, a mix of fear and determination. We knew that every second counted, and the thought of a life in danger made time seem to slow down. We arrived at the address within minutes, our patrol car headlights cutting through the darkness of the night. The house was modest, located in a remote neighborhood on the outskirts of Riverview, Florida. It was enveloped in an almost surreal silence, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The moment we stepped out of the car, our attention was immediately drawn to a woman standing in the front yard. She was visibly shaken, tears streaming down her face, and she kept repeating in a desperate whisper, "He shot me. He shot me." Her words were so full of terror and conviction that I froze for a moment. I glanced at my partner, who looked as perplexed as I felt. We approached her, trying to calm her down. "He didn't shoot you," we said, attempting to reassure both her and ourselves. But she continued to repeat those words, as though she couldn't shake the belief that she had been harmed. The first thing we did was check if she'd actually been hit by a bullet. We examined her body for any injury, but found no trace of a gunshot, no blood, no sign that she'd been wounded. It was disconcerting. The certainty in her eyes and the fear in her voice suggested she genuinely believed she had been shot, but the facts didn't support that. We asked if there were any family members around, someone who could look after her and take her somewhere safe. But she shook her head, seeming to have no one to turn to. We offered to take her somewhere else where she could be under protection, but she refused. Despite the obvious fear, she insisted on staying right there, which baffled us even more. After a while and many attempts to get her to change her mind, we asked if she would be okay on her own. She nodded, still distressed, but insisting she'd be fine. With no other options, and no sign of the man who had supposedly threatened her life, we decided to leave the scene. Yet something about the whole situation felt off, a nagging feeling that something was left unresolved. On our way back to the station at the end of our shift, we expected maybe a laugh or two, or some remark about how strange the night had been. Instead, one of the dispatchers looked up as we walked in. His expression changed to near panic, his face going pale and his eyes wide. "You said it was that house, right?" he asked hesitantly. We confirmed, feeling the tension in the room spike. That's when he told us something that chilled our blood. That same woman, the very one we had encountered, had died 6 years ago, shot by her own husband. He had shot her in the head and was never caught. In that moment, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My partner and I stared at each other, trying to process what we'd just heard. How was that possible? We had spoken to her, tried to help her. Yet according to this account, she'd been dead for years. The information rattled us, but we decided to let it go. There was no logical explanation for what we had experienced, and neither of us wanted to discuss it further. We knew that if we told people, we'd likely be ridiculed, or worse, have our sanity questioned. So we buried the incident in our memories and tried to move on with our lives. But the truth is, I never stopped thinking about that encounter. 2 years went by, and though the memory of that night still haunted me, I focused on my work. By then, I was responsible for training a new recruit, an eager rookie looking to prove himself. We were out on another night patrol when a call came in through the radio, catching us off guard. It was a call from the same house. The voice on the radio was all too familiar, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. It was the same woman. Despite all my training, I couldn't help the chill that crept up my back. Something inside me knew this wasn't going to be a routine call. I had no choice though. I had to return to that house and finally figure out what was really going on, even if it meant facing something beyond my understanding. We arrived at the house, and as we approached, the radio in our car began to emit static, a rare occurrence, as if the air surrounding the place was charged with electricity, interfering with our equipment. My heart pounded as we stepped out of the patrol car, and the rookie beside me seemed to sense the same tension. With each step we took toward the front door, the static intensified, until all we could hear was an incessant buzz. The door opened before we could knock, and there she was. The woman looked exactly the same as before, with that haunted, desperate expression. But this time she didn't say, "He shot me." Instead, she simply pointed inside the house and said, "He's in there." My instincts kicked in. Without hesitation, I drew my weapon and motioned for the rookie to do the same. We entered the house cautiously, hearts racing. The place was silent, except for the echo of our footsteps on the wooden floor. The tension was almost tangible, as though something was about to happen. We moved slowly through the rooms, checking every corner. Finally, in the last bedroom, we found a man. He was hiding, as if he knew we were coming for him. His face was a mix of shock and panic, but there was no time to hesitate. We arrested him immediately. And as I cuffed him, a horrifying realization hit me. His description matched the husband who had killed that woman years earlier. The discovery was both terrifying and clarifying. After all those years, we had finally found the man responsible for the shooting, all thanks to her, the very woman who had somehow led us right to him. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for her murder. And from that day on, we never again received a call from that house. The case was closed, and the woman could finally rest in peace. Yet even now, the memory of that night still haunts me. I can't help but wonder. Was it all just a coincidence? Or was it something more? Was she the one guiding us to her killer? Her way of seeking justice from beyond the grave? These questions remain unanswered, and perhaps they always will. But one thing is certain. That house, that woman, and that eerie encounter will never leave my mind. A police officer's life is full of uncertainty and brushes with the unexplainable. But what I experienced in that house went far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Even now, years later, telling this story sends a chill through my body, reminding me that sometimes the past finds a way to make itself heard, even if it comes from a voice beyond the grave. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.